Hello, lovelies. Today I'm going to be doing a lot of stuff working on my speech for my speech class. I didn't know if you knew that I was in a speech class, but I am. So this video might be really long, or it might be like a very mini segmented video, but I'm practicing my speech, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read the thing that I wrote out as a full long speech that I'm not actually supposed to memorize, just so you guys can see what my original conceptualization was. I sound drunk, but I'm not, I promise. Maybe not having eaten enough today, but I'm actually really full right now, so we'll talk about that later. Obsession. Jeremy Irvine said, "Determination becomes obsession, and then it becomes all that matters." According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary of the Internet, obsession is a persistent, disturbing preoccupation with an often unreasonable idea or feeling, a compelling motivation. I have been researching things like eating disorders and anxiety disorders, which involve being or having an obsession, for 4.5 years. I feel that this topic is relevant to this audience because adolescent girls often find themselves enamored with a popular band or person, or very focused on grades and appearance. These could all be considered obsessions if taken to the extreme, becoming eating disorders, anxiety disorders, and obsessive love disorders. Today my topic will be affected by obsessions, specifically how it changes physical health, mental health, and social life. The first point we're going to look at is how obsession affects a person's physical body. To begin with, it really depends on the kind of obsession a person has, whether it is an anxiety-related obsession or a love-related obsession. An anxiety-related obsession is often driven by compulsions, actions a person does to relieve an obsessive thought. Anxiety can lower the effectiveness of a person's immune system, cause digestive and bowel problems, headaches, and heart palpitations. One might also have extreme fatigue if one's obsession was to exercise, or if it prevents one from getting enough sleep or food. A love-related obsession is driven more by addictive qualities, wanting to be with a person and keep them safe forever. In a love-related obsession, the body effects will be slightly different. People often just neglect to do self-care, forgetting to eat, sleep, or shower because they are thinking about a person, the next time they will see them and what they will say. Self-harm is also a factor that should be taken into account. Cutting, burning, and many other forms of self-injury are compulsions that do affect people. Scratching or picking at one's skin or biting one's nails when people are anxious can also lead to injury. For my next point, I'll be talking about how obsession affects one's mental state. People with obsessive tendencies are more likely to develop disorders such as OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder, OLD, obsessive love disorder, EDs, eating disorders, and other mental disorders that relate to anxiety. Obsessive thoughts are thoughts that flow in a loop. Usually negative, a person has an intrusive thought, such as, "You should stab yourself with that screwdriver." They probably choose not to stab themselves with a screwdriver, but the thought doesn't go away, and their brain starts to list the reasons why they should or should not do the action, and what will happen if they do, usually catastrophizing the situation. To alleviate these thoughts and make them go away, the person will perform an action or compulsion to distract themselves, such as tapping their fingers or repeating a phrase they find helpful. Another example of an intrusive thought loop would be something like this. "Did you turn off the stove? You should go check and see if you turned off the stove. If you left the stove on, the house might burn down. So when I touch it and burn themselves, you should go see if you turned off the stove." Whether a person checks once or 10 times, the thoughts might not go away. Those are both anxiety-related thought loops. The obsessive thoughts of a person who had an obsession with another person may be more like this. "I wonder what Frank is doing right now. I'll get to see him at 7 before school and 11 for lunch. I hope he looks at me. Maybe if I take a pass, I can walk past his classroom during the block we have on the same floor. One day he'll look up at me and know I'm the one." This example is much more tame than other things a person with this obsession might think. The obsessive thoughts usually are never gone. The person with the obsession will think about the object of their obsession constantly, often being distracted from whatever they are doing by their obsessive thoughts. Our final point is how obsession affects one's social life. People with an obsession spend an abnormal amount of time thinking about it, doing it, planning when they are going to do it, worrying about whatever it is that they are obsessed with. When a person's time is so extremely occupied with one thing, they tend not to venture out as much. It is hard for them to have relationships with people because having an obsession is very distracting. Often they lose or push away the friends and family that they have as the disorder takes over. This makes them feel lonely and isolated, not good enough for other people, and it lowers their self-esteem. Some people have visible scars or marks which they are self-conscious about. This can lead them to avoid other people or certain types of interactions, furthering their disorder by isolating them. OLD has been mentioned earlier in this speech, but here we will go into more detail about it. According to Dryden Edwards from MedicineNet.com, the person who suffers from obsessive love tends to want to spend excessive time with their love object, such that they think obsessively about and engage in behaviors that put them in touch with their love object to an extreme degree. They may limit how much they engage in recreational activities or other social relationships, even becoming incapacitated to the point of being unable to work. A person who obsessively loves may engage in escalating tools of psychological control or other forms of control in an effort to keep their loved object close. We hear about men being abusive and controlling in the name of love quite often, but rarely women, which is ironic because women are more likely to have this disorder, although only 0.1% of the world's population does. Not every person who has OLD is controlling or abusive, but they may do things like texting or calling their person of interest more times than average, or following them or memorizing their schedule. They don't think of it as wrong because they are only trying to protect the person they love and keep them safe. How would they be able to do that if they didn't know where they were and what they were doing at all times? John Waters said, "Without obsession, life is nothing." Obsession doesn't necessarily make life better either. To conclude, many people are affected by obsessions, physically, mentally, and socially. There are treatments for all of these disorders through therapy, counseling, and medicine, and people can learn to cope with it and coexist with the world more like normal people. Thank you. Jeremy Irvine said, "Determination becomes obsession, and then it becomes all that matters." According to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary of the Internet, obsession is a long definition that isn't super long that I don't remember it right now, so I'm just saying this. I am credible to speak about obsession because I have been researching things like anxiety and eating disorders, which are both things that involve or require one to have an obsession, for about 4.5 years, so I think I know a little bit about that. Yeah, maybe, And I feel like the topic is relevant to this group of people because, like adolescent girls, we get obsessed with things, or we find ourselves really into something, like a person, like a band, or wow, grades. Oh my gosh, wow, gotta get on those grades. And so those can become obsessions, like eating disorders and anxiety disorders, and also obsessive love disorders. Those are things too. My actual topic is affected by obsessions because a lot of people are affected by obsessions. They affect your mental health, your physical health, and your actual social life. And so the first point we're going to look at is your physical body. And before we even start, we got to go into the fact that there are two different kinds of obsession that we're going to be talking about today. One of the kinds of obsession is the anxiety-related obsession. So anxiety-related obsessions are triggered by anxiety, and they're usually intrusive thought loops, or you have compulsion to do something because of your anxious thought. So that's usually how they manifest. And so people with anxiety, they have stuff like heart palpitations, bowel problems. They're just really stressed all the time, so you get headaches and stuff. It's not fun. And then people with a love obsession, or they're obsessed with a person, things that they have problems with are more like being sleep deprived, or not eating enough, or being just super tired because they forgot to do something, or forgetting to shower, just because they're so obsessed with this one person they can't stop thinking about it or doing it. And then we're gonna move on to compulsion that some people have, and this can apply to either kind of disorder, is self-harm. So some people cut or burn or do other forms of self-harm to, that's their compulsion. Other people just fidget, and when they're fidgeting, they're biting their nails or picking at their hands or scratching, and that actually leaves abrasions and cuts and open wounds. So that's not good either, because that's all kinds of injuries. So we're going to move on to the point 2, which is my next point, and that is how obsession affects one's mental state. Being obsessed with something can actually lead to a lot of mental disorders, like OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, OLD, which is obsessive love disorder, EDs, which are eating disorders, and other anxiety-related disorders that, because obsessions usually result from an anxiety or become a thing that creates anxiety once you're obsessed with it. And then they often come from having a thought pattern or a thought loop. So a thought loop is when you just have a thought and it just goes round and round in your head and it doesn't go out of your head forever. So for instance, what if someone had the thought, wow, I should stab myself with a screwdriver. They're probably not going to stab themselves with a screwdriver, but they're going to continue thinking about it. They're just going to be like, screwdriver, wonder what would happen if I stabbed myself with a screwdriver. And their brain just lists all the reasons why not, what would happen if they did, what would happen if they didn't. And it just gets very annoying and just really crowds up your brain because you're full of all these thoughts, and it makes it hard to concentrate on other things. Another example would be like, what if you didn't turn off the stove? Like, what if you didn't turn off the stove? You should go see if you turned off the stove. Like, your house might burn down, someone might put their hand on it and get really injured. What if you didn't turn off the stove? You need to go see if you turned off the stove. Like, you may have already checked to see if you turned off the stove like 10 times, but that doesn't mean the thought is going to go away, so you need to go check the stove one more time to make sure that it's off. And then your final little thought loop is like, those were anxiety-related thought loops. So, like, an obsessive love-related thought loop is going to be something a little bit more like, wow, that person, they're great. They're amazing. I wish they would love me. I'm going to follow them around everywhere. I'm going to take a pass out of my class so I can go stare at them in their class for 5 minutes. Yeah. Then our final point is like how obsession affects one's social life. So levels of human interaction. People often don't go out much when they're obsessed with something. It's kind of distracting. It takes over your life a little bit. So you don't really go out. You don't get to hang out with your friends and family very often. In fact, sometimes you push them away. Like, your obsession takes over a person's obsession can take over so much that they just can't do that anymore. And they're just very inside, less social. They don't do much that's involving with other people because they're so focused on their obsession. And it also can change, like, relationships. For instance, when you are having, like, obsessed with a person, yeah, it's not the best. I think about them a lot, obviously, and there's a long paragraphal definition that I'm supposed to know, but I don't have memorized yet, so I don't have that to tell you right here. But obsessive love disorder is something that actually happens more commonly in women, even though we mostly hear about stuff like that from men. And people who have obsessive love disorder don't see it as a bad thing. They just think that they're trying to keep the person that they love real safe. And how are they supposed to do that if they don't know where their person is and what they're doing? Because, like, you can't keep someone safe if you don't know where they are and what they're doing all the time, right? Right. And so only 0.1% of the world's population even has obsessive love disorder, so it's not a super common thing. That's like 7 with 6 zeros behind it. That number is about how many people have it in the world. To conclude, the theme was affected by obsession, and it changes your physical health, your mental health, and your social life. John Waters said, without obsession, life is nothing. And that statement is not always true. However, there are treatments for disorders that involve obsession and just obsession in general, both like with medicine and with therapy, physical and other kinds of therapy. And so people who do have these disorders are able to live a normal life and have, like, just life stuff. So, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. This was obsession and how it affects people. Thanks so much, and I will see you guys later. Bye!